in our library, we try to focus on the history of the Archdiocese of St. John's, and usually it's with particular reference to the early bishops, the first 5 bishops, all of whom were Irish Franciscans. So we try to tell their story because it's probably the less known story. However, we also know that the Padre of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment was Thomas Nangle. Nangle is a fascinating character to me, and I think to a lot of people, but he's been lost for a long time to history. Why? We're not sure, but there are probably a bunch of reasons for that. First of all, he left the priesthood in the 1920s, and that was unheard of in those days. And then he left Newfoundland and went to, in those days, Rhodesia, later Zimbabwe, and was rarely heard of again. Why he left? I'd say after his 2.5 years overseas in the war as Padre of the Regiment, and then as in his work with the Imperial War Graves Commission as the Director of Graves Registration and Inquiry. He was responsible for the exhumation of all the isolated graves of Newfoundlanders and the repatriation then of those corpses into the known graveyards that we have now, the cemeteries in Europe, France, Flanders, Holland, Belgium, that we know now. That must have been a tremendously traumatic work. We also know that he watched his best friend, Steve Norris, die at Goudicor. That too must have been a very traumatic event. He's also known as the visionary behind the Trail of the Caribou, those 5 caribou monuments that are in France and Belgium today, largely because of his vision, his planning, and his fundraising. But he also was the fundraiser and visionary behind the National War Memorial at King's Beach here in St. John. After that, his sidekick and his greatest assistant in the fundraising for the National War Memorial and the work they did together for the veterans of this country. A few weeks actually after the dedication of the War Memorial, Gerald Whitty and some veteran friends were at a dinner, and actually 5 of them were killed by a drunk driver. And Nangle presided and preached at the funerals. And it was after that that he sort of disappears from history. I would think that today we might say that Nangle was a pretty classic case of post-traumatic stress disorder. And so I think the only thing we can do now is be grateful for Thomas Nangle's contribution to our church, to our veterans, and to our country, and to make his name known and to tell his story to a new generation.